Hi, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. I will introduce myself in a brief moment, but I will also wanted to kind of frame the focus of today's webinar. I invited Passive House Canada to talk specifically about multi-unit residential. So if you are interested in other scope of projects such as residential or office, I don't want to waste your time. This is not what this webinar is about. So if we've never met before, I'm Nama Blonder. I'm an architect and urban planner with Smart Density. We are joined today by almost 400 people to listen to this webinar. So I'm very excited and thank you. I invited Passive House Canada because it actually, it's an interesting story. It brought up from a client that asked me a question about what are the sustainability features that could be implemented in multi-residential, in multi-unit residential buildings. And I figured that if we find it interesting, others probably would do too. So please connect with me on LinkedIn to be up to date with future webinars. And I would like to introduce our guest today. So Chris Ballard is the CEO of Passive House Canada, has a history of supporting environmental and land use causes, most recently as the Ontario's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, implementing the government's plan for a clean environment and a sustainable economy. He also served as the Minister of Housing and the Minister responsible for the Ontario's Poverty Reduction Strategy and member of the Treasury Board. His leadership in journalism, communications, and public affairs includes terms as president and board member of the Public Affairs Association of Canada. Marine Sanchez, senior passive house consultant with RDH Building Science, being part of Canada's highly experienced passive house professional circle, Marine leads RDH Passive House Consulting Services on the East Coast. She is one of a few building certifiers in North America and joined RDH specialist team to focus on large-scale mixed-use projects. The rest of her time is split between supporting Toronto implementing their zero emissions buildings framework and teaching in the PH community since 2013. So Chris and Marine, thank you very much for being here and joining us. And please, let's get started.
Away we go. Well, thank you very much for having us today, and thank you to everyone who's joined us on the webinar so that we can present. Maureen is controlling the slides today, so Maureen, why don't we fire up the deck and away we go. And we really look forward to answering your questions, and if we can't answer them, we'll get the answers to you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Nama. Thank you, Chris.
Okay. So we've shared the slides. Today we're going to be talking about Passive House 101 and the principles for a multi-family residential building. Next slide. We've got our agenda is really straightforward. We want to talk about the need for high performance buildings. We're going to talk about some passive house principles that apply to buildings of all shapes and sizes. We're going to talk somewhat in depth about the Toronto Green Standard version 3 and new approaches for high performance buildings, and then a little bit more about passive house if people want to learn some more. Next slide. The first question we get asked is who is Passive House Canada? Well, we are a not-for-profit. We're a membership-based social enterprise. We engage with in advocacy with industry, government, and anyone else who will listen. We provide a lot of education and professional development for members and others right across Canada. We provide technical services to members and manufacturers of passive house components or those who want to create passive house components. We've got members and staff and instructors located right across Canada. So lots of great people involved. Next slide. Our mission, 3 points: to make zero emission buildings known and adopted by government, industry, and the public. To support government and industry in the transition to high performance buildings through education, certification, and policy development, and to promote the passive house Institute building standard, which is globally recognized as the best building standard for high performance buildings. So next, the need for high performance buildings. Well, here's the chart that talks about Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. You can see that it's relatively flatlined, which isn't a good thing if we're to meet our 2030, 2050 Paris Accord commitments to reduce GHG emissions. You know, the argument is there's been real growth in Canada, and the increase hasn't necessarily reflected that growth, but we're still not getting to where we need to go. Let's go on with the next slide. And we know that houses account for worldwide, or buildings account for about 30% of GHG emissions. Toronto, it's about 53%. Vancouver's about 52% of GHG emissions are from buildings. So clearly, focusing on buildings and reducing GHG emissions through our buildings is fundamental if the country's to meet its climate change targets. Toronto is making progress, and here's a chart outlining Toronto. It's making progress, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's about halfway to its 2030 target of a 65% reduction from 1990. But really, there's a lot of hard work ahead, and especially when you consider that a large chunk of that reduction was because of the provincial coal phase out, the production of electricity through burning coal that was phased out at the provincial level by premiers McGuinty and Wynne. Vancouver, in contrast, is had about a 9% reduction since 1990. And I use Vancouver as the contrast because that's the city that really sparked the revolution, I would say, for Passive House and bringing Passive House to the municipal level. Next slide. Toronto's greenhouse, our urban policies, Toronto's urban policies focusing on greenhouse gas emissions. Their Green Standard version 3 that Marine will get into, 100% of new buildings will be or must be net zero by 2030. So that's what we're doing in Toronto. In Vancouver, they rely on the British Columbia government's Energy Step Code, which takes them to that zero emissions. Other cities in North America with notable policies include Boston's Climate Change Action Plan and New York City's Climate Mobilization Act. Next slide. So where does Passive House fit into all of this need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Well, if we look at the space heating needs of buildings, this is buildings in general, we see that that the average residential building in Canada uses 121 kilowatts per square meter per year of energy for space heating. Commercials even higher at 203, but by adopting Passive House building principles, that's driven down to just 15. So the chart on the far left is the one that I'm focusing on here. Huge difference between 15 kilowatt hours per square meter per year and 203 in commercial and 121 in the average home. This is the operational carbon it takes to heat these buildings. Next. We talk about the where the marketplace is going, marketplace transformation, and the need for government to act. But in many ways, government has acted. We have the Pan-Canadian framework from December of 2016, where all of the provinces and territories sat down at the same table and decided, you can click again there, Marine, decided that that they would adopt increasingly stringent building codes to get to net zero energy ready by 2030. The federal government's national building code is looking at net zero by 2050, and the Prime Minister recently announced even more ambitious targets by 2030. So all of the governments are already, provincial governments are already on board, and we are, the train has left the station, an electrified train, by the way. That train has left the station. And we are heading to that net zero world. So a lot of the work that we do at Passive House Canada is in educating and helping businesses and government in that transformation. A lot of the work we do is working with municipal governments to meet their climate emergency targets, their GHG emission reductions targets by adopting Passive House standards in their building code. Next. So in terms of how does this play out, we pick a couple of cities again, Toronto and Vancouver, transforming the market. The market is in transformation as we speak. 2017, Toronto Council voted unanimously to declare a climate emergency and accelerate its efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Vancouver has a near zero emissions building standard and continues to introduce new and innovative building bylaws to facilitate the development of passive house buildings in that city. So the marketplace isn't about to be transformed. It is in the midst of transformation, which is why we believe it's important that as many professionals in the business, as many policymakers as possible know about the transformation and are prepared for the transformation, and Canada isn't caught flat-footed. Next. So we know that governments seeking to create sustainable communities are considering building codes based on the Passive House approach. As we like to say at Passive House Canada, build better, feel better. That's the Passive House way. And this is my tip of the hat to the urban planning that needs to go on and work with architects and engineers and developers and builders so that we build those sustainable communities of the future. Passive House can play a very important role in helping us get there. Next slide, please. And I wanted to talk about, because I know we're focusing on multi-unit residential buildings, but I want to give you some sense of just how big the Passive House movement is internationally. This is the suburb of Heidelberg, Bonnstadt. It's an entire community that over the past 12 to 15 years has sprung up. Every single building is a Passive House building. There's a multitude of forms. You know, the one of the Passive House myths we like to bust is that if you're building to Passive House, you have to have tiny little windows that don't open. All the buildings have to be, squares. That's not the truth. Here's 4 buildings. We have a fire hall, residences, some office space, and a nursery school, all built to Passive House, all built, over the past few years in this new community. Bonnstadt is home to about 6,800 people. It's associated with Heidelberg University. It's got scientists and academics and students and families and workers all living and working within this green area. So some beautiful buildings have gone up there. Next slide. And some more buildings from Heidelberg. Again, home to 6,800 people and a variety of different residential buildings there. So it can be done. It can be done on scale. And we're happy to support the growth of Passive House right across Canada. Next slide. So the question is, I talked a little bit earlier about energy use, operational carbon in a Passive House, defining a Passive House. But the question remains, what is a Passive House? Next slide. Well, a Passive House from the outside pretty much looks like any other building. It's a very basic concept. It's keep the heat in during cold months, keep the heat out during hot months. while continuously improving indoor air quality. Those are the fundamentals. Passive houses can look just like virtually anything else that's out there. Next slide. And in fact, here are some passive house buildings built in Canada. And you can see from these pictures that there's a variety of different looks and shapes and building materials. I think that's one of the reasons that architects love passive house, is that it is not a check the box. You're allowed to use whatever materials, whatever form you want to meet the outcome. So passive house is an outcomes-based standard. How you get there is up to you, but in order to be passive house certified passive house, you have to meet a number of those performance-based criteria. Things, use, air exchanges, and air tightness. Next slide, please. Okay, there are traditionally 5 principal house building. We've added another one that you need to know about. The first thing to start with is building massing. What's the more creative the design, we'll say, oftentimes the more difficult it is to achieve a passive house sort of, we'll call it 0. One of the most important things you need to start with. Next is that you provide super insulation in this building, so and I won't get into the U value, but lots and lots and lots of insulation in the walls, the foundations, the ceilings. Third is that, second, we'll call it, is airtight construction. And this is where passive house folks are quite fanatical about making sure the building is extremely airtight. And again, this is about keeping hot air in wintertime and hot air out I think we need to click on that. There we are, thermal bridge free. More that can be difficult, but we know how to achieve that even in large buildings. Fourth principle, those high quality windows. So these would be generally triple pane with an E coating and some type of inert gas between them, separating them. High quality windows with solar orientation where possible. And the fifth is a ventilation system, a really good quality ventilation system, especially important when you consider that these buildings are airtight. So we have to make sure there is lots of fresh air that's being brought in, and the energy from the outgoing air is being transferred to the incoming air. So those are the 6 principles of building to passive house. Next slide. Great. So why build, though, to the passive house standard? Well, all the focus to this point has been about energy efficiency, and passive house is perhaps the most energy efficient way to build. But interestingly, initially, passive house was designed for a comfort standard. It's an ISO, has an ISO comfort standard attached to it. So it was a system that was designed to provide comfortable, healthy indoor air quality. If you build our way, you will get a more durable building. Obviously, a very energy efficient building, one that has lower GHG emissions, and one that is exceptionally low cost to operate. So these are just some of the benefits, or the key benefits of building to the passive house way. But we like to tell people we're more than energy efficiency. We're really focused on comfort and health. And if you build it, you also, the right way, you also get energy efficiency. Next. Great story. Passive House, one of the myths of Passive House is that it is some European standard being imposed on the Canadian marketplace. This is the Saskatchewan Conservation House. It's located in Regina. This house dates to 1977 during one of the oil crises when oil prices went through the roof and governments were worried that Canadians would not be able to afford heating oil to stay warm in the wintertime. And so they brought together a really smart group of scientists and engineers who developed and researched and pulled together all of the ideas from around the world and built the Saskatchewan Conservation House. Folks are still living in this house today. It's still performing the way it was designed to when it was built back in 1977. And this building, I like to note, really contains the DNA of the modern Passive House Institute standard, and it has been recognized by the Passive House Institute as being a forerunner. So you can see it has a compact shape. It's got a good southern orientation. It's got super insulation. It's airtight, and it had for its day a very innovative HRV, and I believe a lot of the windows, the casements for the windows, the HRV were built by hand by the engineers because there was nothing on the marketplace. So, I think those of us in Canada can feel proud that that we were at the forefront of the movement. Next slide. So, I'm going to turn this over now to Marine, who can take us through the Toronto Green Building Standard version 3. Marine, take it away.
Sounds good. So thank you, Chris. So Chris explained, what is a passive house and what are the key principles. So before diving into the Toronto Green Standard version 3, we wanted to highlight that passive house is recognized as an alternative compliance path to the highest tier, right? So these like the city of Toronto, such as quite a few other cities, as we've seen before, have that idea of having net zero ready buildings by 2030. This is where we need to be for us to, have a chance at climate change mitigation. And so this 2030 end goal is very, comparable to passive house. So what does this mean when Chris was talking about that transformation? So the first thing, right, just passing by, there you go. The first thing that I want to highlight before diving into the Toronto Green Standard, also called TGS, is across the whole industry to go to high performance buildings, there is a shift from using reference buildings, so a percentage better than code or than something else, to an absolute performance metrics. And I think this is key to recognize. And what are these absolute performance metrics? So you recognize on the left of the slide that, typical hierarchy of working through passive measures first, reduce your demand so that you waste less. And once you've met that demand, once you've reduced that demand, meet it through energy efficient system before even looking at renewables. So the metrics are kind of following that hierarchy. And the first metric that I want to spend just a little bit of time on is what we call the thermal energy demand intensity, the TEDI, And TEDI, is the new guy in town, because the other two metrics are going to say, oh, Marine, that's fine. I know what you mean. We've talked about this before. But that thermal energy demand intensity, the TEDI, is that new metric included into quite a few performance standards, including, Passive House and TGS. So what is the TEDI? The TEDI is literally the amount of heating you need to keep your building comfortable throughout winter. It's that simple. It is your space heating demand. So you can see that by setting that TEDI metric, we are actually going to pay a lot of attention to the enclosure, which we haven't done before. Next is your total energy use intensity. So your total EUI, or your EUI, as you might have heard that before. And this is, fairly obvious to everybody. It's the total amount of energy your building needs to run, right? So rather than zooming in on the enclosure, we're zooming out again to look at, how much are you charged at your meter, because this is where your building needs to operate. Okay, so two very good metric, but it doesn't tie us back yet again, to climate change. Therefore, the third metric is what we call the greenhouse gas intensity, which is recognizing that not all energy is created equal. So where is your energy source coming from? Is it gas or electricity? Is it renewable or not? Which means that you're then translating the amount of energy you need into a carbon impact related to your building. So these three absolute metrics are metrics that we keep seeing absolutely everywhere in every single climate change policies that we're seeing, right? And TGS, the Toronto Green Standard version 3, is no different. So if I zoom now to TGS version 3, tier 4, this is the highest tier, this is the 2030 target, this is the end goal, this is what we need to build, and this is the only thing we'll build from 2030 onward. If I give you the exact figures, you're going to recognize the criteria is right in front of you. We have a thermal energy demand intensity, a TEDI, of no more than 15 kilowatt hour per square meter per year. You remember when Chris presented the difference between what buildings typically use to where they can go down if they are a passive house? This is that 15. This is that 90% reduction compared to what we normally deliver. You do need a whole building air tightness test just to understand how much we're leaking and what we build. You have a total EUI, a total energy demand intensity of around 70, and a greenhouse gas intensity of no more than 5 kilograms of CO2 per square meter per year. So these are all your operational targets to get down to buildings that we call net zero ready. So these are the Toronto Green Standard tier 4 targets for energy. Now, if I just translate these into passive house, you're going to see how much of a synergy you get between the two. Here are the passive house targets. Well, funnily enough, if I start from the bottom again, you're going to recognize exactly the same number for heating and for cooling. So we get just two different buckets, one for heating, one for cooling, but they're almost identical. You need whole building air tightness, and this time you have a number that gives you a pass and fail criteria. You have a frequency of overheating because passive house, as much as it's an amazing, energy saving standard, it actually comes from comfort. So that criteria is just ensuring that you're maintaining that comfort in summer as well. We're not just focusing on winter. And finally, you get a target that is called primary energy renewable, which is around 60 kilowatt hour per square meter per year. And that sounds a bit funky. I'll give that to you. But what you have to think is that that passive house target called the PER, the primary energy renewable, is simply a combination of your EUI, how much energy you use into your building, with your greenhouse gas intensity, which is where is your energy coming from and what is the carbon impact of each energy source. If you bundle that together, you get the PER. So you can see that we're getting a lot of synergy between the two. Hence, passive house being an alternative compliance path to tier 4. So again, back to the transformation that Chris was talking about. This is a graph, just to explain it quickly. You're looking between left to right at the 4 archetypes for the Toronto Green Standard. High-rise MURBs, low-rise MURBs, offices, and retail. So we're going to focus on the 2 on the left. This is what we're talking about today. You see the TEDI in dark green. You see the total EUI as the whole column, which includes the light green. And then you see the carbon intensity as red dots on a different scale, because we're now talking carbon rather than energy. And you can see that it keeps getting tighter, right? Step after steps. So how are we going to get there? Well, the Toronto Green Standard version 3 was published in 2018, and they said, guys, we've got 12 years to get there. So we're going to give you 4 steps, and every 4 years, we're going to take the lowest step away and, upgrade you to the next steps. So you can see these 4 steps of 2018, 2022, 2026, and 2030 to get us to net zero ready buildings. And where do we end? No matter which archetypes we're picking, we're ending up with a building that looks awfully like a passive house, because our space heating demand is really, really tiny. Our total energy consumption is, again, reduced by at least a factor 2, if not 3, compared to what we typically deliver. And our greenhouse gas intensity is very low, which is that electrification train that Chris was talking about. Okay, so you can see that, again, a lot of synergies between the two, and the end goal is to deliver, you know, buildings by 2030 that are passive house levels of performance. You know, there's no two ways about it. This is where we're going. And by the way, as a really small note, if any of you are working with city-owned buildings, the city has decided to lead by example. So the city and the city-owned buildings will have to comply with these steps one phase in advance. So city-owned buildings will be designed to passive house levels of performance by 2026. And the rest of the industry, in terms of the private sector, will then follow in 2030. So you can see that we are, I don't know, what do we want to say? We are 2-3 building cycles maximum away from all of us having to deliver a passive house, which is pretty, you know, when you sit down with clients and with developers, they're like, wait, are you sure? It's like, yeah, if it takes you 2 to 3 years to deliver a building from beginning of design till completion, then we get another 2-3 goes maximum before this becomes a norm, which is really, you know, we need to keep that in mind to be able to move the industry at that pace there. So having talked about TGS, I've given you the kind of technical figures. I wanted to touch base on the soft skills and the different approaches that we're seeing for these buildings. So what I'm trying to do is kind of digest literally 10 years of passive house delivery into just a few slides to say, well, it is technical. We need to achieve all these, you know, performance targets that we've set. But at the end of the day, it is never, you know, the technical capabilities that are stopping us from delivering passive house buildings. To me, it seems that the soft skills and changing the way people act and people think and people design is what is giving us more barriers to get there. So having a thought as how will the process differ when you're working with high performance, especially passive house buildings, I wanted to summarize that in a few slides. We need to have new approaches, and I trying to divide the challenges that I found in 4 different parts. The first one is around design processes, the second one around communication, the third one around that new approach that we call energy budget management, and that fourth one around, you know, commitment and the team, right? So if I dive into challenge number 1, the design process, we are used to a top-down approach. We design the building first, we follow from the client to the architect to a flat design team. And by designing the building first, checking the performance second, okay, it has worked for us up to now, but when we're going to move to these 2030 targets, it's not going to work anymore. So that design approach is going to be superseded really soon. I do apologize, there's work done in the unit next door, so the Italian people hearing can start shouting a bit more, okay? Sorry about this. So this approach doesn't work anymore. We need to move to that type of approach. A circular approach with a fully integrated design team, which makes us set the performance first and design around it. So we would in effect kind of reshuffle, redefine the play area that we can evolve in to design buildings to be able to set that performance and meet it. And what is new with that approach? First, a ton of communication everywhere that you can see through the graph. And second, a quality assurance process to say, I love that you had a really good intent, but it doesn't matter what intent you have. I need to know what you delivered. And this is what quality assurance is all about. Okay, still thumbs up for hearing me kind of half okay through the drill? Okay, thank you so much for bearing with me. So you can see that we are like, a designed intent is not enough anymore. We need that quality assurance. We need to prove that we're delivering okay. And that takes a lot of communication. So moving on to challenge number 2. We need to speak the same language. So I get a lot of people laughing through that slide, and it happens to me all the time. And let me tell you, it's not because I'm French, right? It's next level up. We keep working on different projects with amazing design team, and yet we need to get better at communicating. So I won't give you like too many details, but the truth is, when we're going to start looking at every design element in so much detail, it takes extra effort to be really clear on what we want, but we do need to be clear to be able to maintain performance. So quick example, maybe with planning requirements. Let me be completely fair. I look at a building from an energy standpoint. It is my job, it is my goal to make it use as little energy as it can to deliver what is intended. Well, when I face planners, they're looking at it from a very different perspective. And the fact that we have different perspective means that we might have either some misunderstanding or truthfully, that we might want to, like, for one same element, we might want 2 different things. And we need to talk together to find that best compromise, to say, well, what you're after is important, but what I'm after is important. So how do we meet in the middle and deliver what is intended? So that extra level of communication is really important, because let me be fair, there are code requirements, there are planning requirements, there are all kinds of requirements that are kind of not aligned with, you know, energy saving requirements, and we need to work through them to be able to deliver this building more easily. And it only goes through communication. Challenge number 3 is what we call that energy budget. So everybody is really familiar with a financial budget. We've always had a financial budget, and we know how to, you know, we know how to look after it, right? There's a set budget and you can't go over, that's it, make it work. Well, with these absolute targets and these high performance buildings, we have, in addition to a financial budget, an energy budget to manage. And we need, as a whole design team, which starts, you know, in planning and finishes with construction, at completion, we need to be comfortable and understand that energy budget. So what am I meaning by energy budget, and why am I showing that balancing act on the slide right now? Well, if we go back to that first metric, you remember TEDI, right? This TEDI guy, or thermal energy demand intensity, it's the amount of space heating we need. So what does that mean? For me to feel comfortable, I need all my losses to equal all my gains in my building. This is how I maintain my 20-degree temperature that I've decided I wanted. Okay, so this sounds really simple, but can we just write a line in our specification to say, I need a comfortable building, I need a building with a very, very low TEDI, a low space heating demand? No, it doesn't work this way. Why is that? Because if I look at all my losses and all my gains, let's zoom in a little while on that graph. The left column is all your losses through ventilation, infiltration, walls, roof, floors, thermal bridging. And your gains on the right are solar gains in yellow and internal heat gains in orange, right? Your people, your equipment, your cats, your kids, yeah? And if you look at that graph in winter, your losses and your free gains from the solar gains and the internal heat gains, they never match each other. So you need to come in with your red block, which is your space heating demand, to make them equal so that your building becomes comfortable. So when you want a building with a low TEDI, when you want a passive house building, which means a red block that is no more than 15, you need to have an understanding of how every single other block is looking and how do they stack up together. Because if the green block is using too much, then maybe, you know, which is ventilation, for instance, then maybe you need the yellow block, the windows, to perform better so that your balance can still match, okay? So fundamentally, think about your energy budgets for your space heating, for your total energy consumption as other budgets that you get given, and you need to manage them just as simply as you manage your financial budget. And we need to get to grip with that. It has to become the new norm. So 3 challenges on, what is the 4th challenge? Well, for us, especially as, for me at RDH being an energy modeler, right? I am in charge of balancing all these blocks and telling my design team, yes, our red block is very, very low. What does it take for me to know how these blocks are adding up? I need commitment from my team, and I need to work with a front-loaded, integrated design process, right? If I need to guess how all my blocks are doing, I need the team to guide me really early on. So you all are familiar with this graph. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but spoiler alert, you need exactly the same thing for high performance buildings. By having an integrated and front-loaded process, you are going to work together as a team, and you're going to make key decisions early on and try as best as you can to stick with it. I know it's hard, but we're going to try. So these are the 4 key challenges that we're seeing, and the 4 kind of different approaches that you're going to need to integrate for us to deliver high performance building, as if it was the new norm. So to summarize what we've seen today, absolute targets, it doesn't matter if it's passive house or not, absolute targets are coming. So everybody needs to be comfortable with these absolute targets and understand what impacts them, because this is our only way to 2030 net zero ready buildings, okay? You can see it for passive house, you can see it for TGS Residence 3, and a few other municipalities policies. You need to be comfortable with that energy budget management. Everybody in the design team, starting with the client, we need to understand what is that energy budget management, like our financial budget management. We set clear targets, we set them early, and then non-negotiable, because when there's no more, right? So that changes the approaches we as, an industry design buildings. And finally, it has to be an integrated design approach. It is a team sport. High performance building is a team sport. There's no 2 ways about it. If somebody decides not to play, it becomes really difficult to deliver. So what do you need? A common language, extra collaboration, and clear communication, and having that understanding of that, balancing exercise that I've showed for the budget, which can only happen through the whole team buying in. So here we are with our technical part. I'll let Chris finish.
Great, thanks, Marine, and thanks for that. Thanks for the overview, the technical overview. We want to spend as much time as we can taking any questions that people may have. So I'll just touch really briefly. Again, I go back to Passive House Canada. We support industry and government in this transition to high performance, zero emission buildings. And I would encourage anyone who's interested to visit our website and learn more. Maybe sign up for our free newsletter and possibly even become a member. We have certification courses, webinars, and events. One great thing about the Passive House community, especially for those who are wanting to attempt Passive House, it's a really inclusive group that likes to share. So by day, and Marina's nodding her head, by day we have ferocious competitors going after business, but after hours over a glass of wine or coffee, I find people sitting down to solve common issues, common technical issues, or discuss approaches to passive house building. So it's a great group, great organization to join if you're interested. Next slide. And I will say, for anyone who wants to learn more, we have an introduction to passive house buildings. It's a course 90, online, of course, with an instructor. The next one we're running starts June the 1st. So visit our website, passivehousecanada.com, to learn more about that particular one. Next slide. I simply want to remind people, from a passive house perspective, we are part of building sustainable communities. And we know that that passive house buildings are places that people want to live in. They want to work in a passive house buildings. And a sustainable community, in our mind, is a place that people want to live and work in both today and in the future. So next click. There we go. I'll say that Passive House is back to our slogan, build better, feel better. That's the Passive House way. I want to thank everybody for your time and attention today. And again, feel free to visit our website to contact us if you want to learn more, passivehousecanada.com. And there's our presentation, and I hope we have time for some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris and Marine. I've received so many texts and emails thanking me for how informative this session is. So thank you very much. We're a little bit over time, but perhaps I asked Sarah Yadazeto, who is the marketing and communication coordinator of Passive House Canada, to perhaps choose, I don't know, 2 questions perhaps. And by the way, I know we had some technical, I increased the Zoom capacity, and I apologize for all of you who missed the beginning. And I received some angry emails, so don't be mad at me. I really only mean well. You will receive a recording later this afternoon for those of you who missed the few moments until I updated something in my Zoom account. So I apologize for that. So Sarah, would you like to perhaps introduce a question or two to Chris and Marine?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is a question then that we have on the chat, and this is a question for, I guess, both Marine and Chris. Does Passive House design typically require thicker ceiling and floor allowances generally?
That's a good question. It depends how you design, but I think that the key difference for passive house buildings as a starting point, it's not every floor and every ceiling. You have to think more about your enclosure, right? Like you have a building and you're putting a nice little duvet layer on it to keep it warm and airtight, right? You're putting it the sweater, then the rainproof jacket, right? So what will definitely be thicker will be that enclosure on the outside. Floor height from one story to the other could be retained as fairly typical. However, you do have to fit in all the HVAC equipment that you need. So of course, depending on the design, you might need to tweak it, but I don't think it's as much of a difference as what happens on the enclosure layer.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's another question here as well. Do all passive house structures all look like boxes? Very institutional, no home appeal. Maybe if either of you can comment on that.
No. We have, there's a simple answer. I hope that a number of the pictures I was showing from Heidelberg give you a sense of, and other pictures from Canada give you a sense of the mass, the scope, the feel of Passive House. And again, I'll say that architects like working in the Passive House world because they get to the low energy standards without us telling them exactly what their building has to look like or be made of. So we find with the Passive House, there's a lot of wood being used and there's a lot of creative design, lots of glass. I had a few questions about, do we have to have tiny windows that don't open? Absolutely not. Again, the pictures I was showing, even in cold climates within Canada, use have lots of windows and many windows that open.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Sarah, sorry.
Oh, yes.
Adding
Go
to
ahead.
that just a little bit. I want to acknowledge that we all have to start somewhere, and I do agree that the starting point used to be 10, 15, 25 years ago. It might have been a bit of a box, right? It has come from there, but we have improved so much that, again, some of the institutional projects that I'm working on for the University of Victoria, the University of Toronto, really, some high percentage of glazing designed by Perkins and Will or Handel Architects in New York. And you can see that it looks absolutely lovely. So I would encourage anybody to just Google stuff out there with these key architects or on the Passive House Canada or directly on the Passive House Institute's website. And you're going to see some weird and wonderful things.
Yeah.
The Vancouver Art Gallery is going to be fabulous by Herzog and de Meuron. So that is not going to be a box, So
Yeah.
Hey, we've gone a long way.
Yeah, I mean, you can Google the Subaru dealership in Red Deer, Alberta, for example, and see a typical car dealership with floor-to-ceiling wall curtain. That's actually a certified passive house wall curtain by a Calgary firm. So you know, the sky is the limit. Just meet those passive house standards and build it however you want.
Okay. Thanks, Chris and Maureen. Nama, do we have time for any more questions, or what would you like to do?
It's up to you.
Sure. I think we
Yeah.
have maybe just one or two more then. So there's one here. It said, I've heard that the new building code being developed by Enercan is losing a lot of the performance-based requirements in its move to a reference building approach. Are you able to comment on this?
Well, a lot of the work we do in government relations is attempting to influence the building code, the national building code development, one that provinces and territories have said they're going to sign on to. And I don't know if it's moving to the reference building approach so much as us attempting to move them away from the reference building approach. That's always been the way things have been done in Canada. You know, there's always give and take in any negotiations, but we've drawn a pretty firm line in the sand in terms of where we think the national building code needs to go. And in spite of that, quite frankly, what municipalities are doing in our mind is what counts. And municipalities are adopting more and more, stringent passive house building codes, building-based passive house-based building codes. So that's where we spend an awful lot of time. The National Building Code is a suggested building code, of course, adopted by the provinces, and implemented by municipalities. But many of them are upping the game, and that's where I think the action is.
Okay.
And actually, Sarah, one of our key technical expert is actually on the steering committee for the update of the National Energy Code. And from a little pinky, I can tell you that they are moving towards the absolute metric approach.
Yeah.
It is hard to set these figures, so maybe the progress is not as fast as we would hope for, but I can tell you that they are not moving backwards. They might just be slow moving forward to the absolute metric.
Yeah.
It is coming no matter what.
And our job at Passive House is to encourage those people at the table to move faster and go further. But we're generally pleased.
Okay. Thank you. I think we'll end just with a final question. The question is, do you have any tools or metrics available to broadly estimate cost differences of building passive house versus code minimum, or step 3 here in BC? I am trying to convince a client with a very large project to go passive house, but they want a good financial argument.
Well, Maureen, can you help us out? Yeah, that's a really detailed question. We could take the next hour and...
Yeah. Okay, so let me try to keep it under 2 minutes. But yeah, I thought we were going to escape the cost question, but we didn't. So, okay, we always have the cost question. And first of all, I want to answer at a high level. There have been some studies that have been made, and there is a cost premium that we've seen between 1% and 9%. So these are the costs. If you do literature review, that's what you're going to see. Again, the BC Energy Step Code, the Toronto Green Standard also did cost analysis, and they showed that we can keep these capital cost premium actually fairly low, to only a few percent above, above typical construction. Yeah. Now, what I want to say is, what you're asking me is not what is the cost premium of a passive house. What you're asking me is, what will the cost premium of my project be? And this is where I say, if you remember that graph of, how much changes cost when they are made, if you make all these key decisions really early and energy efficiency is baked into the design that you're doing, you can keep your cost premium to, almost 0%, I think, because by making energy efficiency to the core, you're already going to start saving, cost with mechanical equipment, with, less glazing and, different items. And then by adding the cost premium of the better quality of equipment that you're buying, yes, you're going to go back to the original budget, but you have a very clear way of keeping that cost premium way in control. But that depends as to which team you're working with. I would, I would recommend an experienced team, and how are the design decisions made and how early, because that's your first key. The final thing I'm going to say in terms of cost as well is when we do a financial analysis, you also want to consider not only the cost premium, but the operational savings that you're going to have through the lifetime of operation of the building, as well as reduction in maintenance, while also, which is something kind of slightly newer, but start considering any carbon taxes and things like that that would be applied to a standard building. Right? Because we also know that with our goal towards net zero ready buildings, the carbon tax that is being set on the use of gas is, again, ramping up in terms of dollars really, really fast towards 2030. So I would also urge people to look at not only that very small window in time of how much cost premium I might have really early, but looking at the whole picture, because that's what makes it, it gives you a better picture, at least for you to see what how these buildings are going to behave over at least a 5, 10, 15-year lifespan, if not the full 30, 40 years.
Okay, no, that's great. And I think, Chris, there was also a paper potentially that I think that you shared recently regarding some of this discussion that we could maybe also make
right.
Sure
The green premium myth, as we call it. We'll have it on our website. Fairly well researched paper with lots of graphs and charts and data. We'll have that on our website in our guest blog. And anyone wants to follow me on LinkedIn, I posted it last night to our LinkedIn website, written by our former CEO, Rob Bernhardt, and it looks at United Nations data, and we've been involved with the UN and others. So it's a good read, I think, for anyone who wants to delve into this. So watch for it on guest blog on our website, or check out our Passive House Canada or my profile on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
I'm putting a link in the chat.
Great.
For your. Okay. Great.
And Nama, you can put my LinkedIn as well, because as Chris said, this community is very open about sharing what we've learned and sharing, I made these mistakes, you don't need to do it. So get a jump start, start from there, and then tell me what are the new things that you are learning. So again, any way you guys can start having your fingers into all these communities, there's a lot that is being shared out there. So just don't hesitate to be in touch, because even if we might not be the right person to answer, we probably have a good idea as to who to point next. So let's make sure that we can share all of that.
Perfect. Here, I'm putting Marine's LinkedIn profile as well. Okay, and with that, it's almost 12 o'clock. So thank you very much. I'm already receiving, as you can see in the chat box, really positive feedback on how informative and useful this presentation was. So thank you, Chris and Marine and Sarah and Paula from Passive House Canada, and have a great rest of the day. And I will send a recording of the webinar for those of you who missed a small part of it or want to watch it again. And it will also be available on our YouTube. So thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.